I'm Nicole Pressley, the national organizer for the You the Vote campaign, which is an electoral organizing initiative of the Unitarian Universalist Association. And I want to start by saying that, of course, right now we are in a deep and critical moral imperative, but that we are very acutely aware of this moral imperative now, but it has been here for decades. In our churches and in our politics, we have adopted individualism, we've adopted competition over the essential building blocks of a democracy, which is community and cooperation. In our most effective movements that have created deep change that we always go back to, they have all included multiracial mobilizations and communities, particularly the communities that are most deeply impacted, and centering them and centering those demands that create more equitable conditions. Unitarian Universalism, we affirm 7 principles as anchors to our faith. And among them, our first principle, which is the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and our 7th principle, which is the respect for the interdependent web of which we are all a part. And for me, those are the 2 anchors of this You the Vote campaign, because it really hits home about who matters and whose voices matter and get heard, and that nothing happens without the collective. Nothing happens without the consent of the community. So when we truly believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all, we begin to understand ourselves as members of a community. And we design systems, right? Systems based on our liberation and community thriving. Our current political reality, unfortunately, is really an expansion of a crisis that has already existed and has been moving through our communities for a long time, particularly low wealth, Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer, immigrant, undocumented communities, and the intersections thereof. Healthcare, food insecurity, unemployment, and of course, why we're here today, really the most salient issue, the complete ignoring and disregard of the will of the people, have all been critical issues, and we've been just chipping and chipping away at it until it's become a crisis that has expanded and impacted more people. And that is the opportunity that we have before us in 2020. So what we're seeing is that fundamental to democracy really is agency and accountability. I think that's what we are all witnessing as we watch press conferences, as we look at the news and say, we have facts, we have people, we have people mobilizing, people making clear demands, we have a constitution, and no one that is in charge, right, is really listening and holding themselves accountable to the will of the people. Essentially, right, we are declaring that like people, right, and communities matter. And really acknowledging now as a large national community that the only ethical system to build around what I'm sure, we all feel is a theological assertion is a democracy that centers justice. This is not just a political assertion, but it is deeply rooted, right, within our faiths and our theological traditions. Our church, right, the Unitarian Universalist faith doesn't just affirm the worth and dignity of people, but we build the systems and the governance models to make it so. Now we do so imperfectly, of course, but it is our essential organizing principle. It is that large goal that we continue to commit to and recommit ourselves to build a world where collective liberation can be a reality. Now, in the history of the United States and in our politics, we have struggled, right? We have deeply struggled to affirm, legislate, and organize around the inherent worth and dignity of all. This is how we get Black Lives Matter being a controversial statement. This is how we are okay with determining the quality of children's education based on income and zip codes. This is how we regulate bodies instead of guns. And this is how we truly get folks who die in their homes out of the fear of plunging their families into debt over their own health and mortality. And the sad fact is that was the case before COVID-19, right? Having a healthcare system totally dependent on if you have enough money to live is a deep, deep moral failing of the United States. But so instead, right, so for our faiths and our faith movements, instead of being prophetic, right, because we always have to be, if we're demanding that our systems of government are accountable and transparent, we must be as well. So what I would have to say about the role of faith in this moment and the moral imperative is also to own our own history and place in this work. Because instead, for so long, for many of us, instead of being prophetic, we have decided to be pragmatic. We have accepted the terms of parties, candidates, institutions that tell us what is possible. But these institutions, right, these institutions, especially, of course, our government, get their power essentially from the community. And our faith communities have a charge to go beyond what is politically expedient. We hold radical political imaginations about what is right, what is righteous, and what is just. So when we commit ourselves to the teachings of our faith traditions, right, as Rabbi Michael was talking about, like, where do we find in our traditions, right, evidence of this being super critical, not only in 2020, but to the operation of a just and functioning society? We have to look at the teachings of our faith traditions, where we are compelled and moved to engage with community and really create a new world. And I think that's the goal, and that is the mandate, bringing these fundamental systems of ethics into the public square, and assert that our faith, of course, is not partisan, but our faith is political, right? It is what guides our choices and how we act in the world. And this electoral work right now, of course, is an essential battle. It is an essential battleground to create active and imaginary space where we can work for the agency of all people and the accountability of every single one of our systems. And what that requires, especially for folks with privilege. And I say this as a Unitarian Universalist who is representing an electoral justice campaign within a faith that is largely right and largely affluent. It means that we must listen, right? And we must follow the politics and the demands of those who suffer most under these systems of oppression, because they have the answers, right? They have the answers to their own liberation. As we do electoral work with our You the Vote campaign, we have intentionally decided to partner with organizations that are led by and accountable to frontline communities. We have committed to working to combat voter suppression. We've been doing that with partnering with Reclaim Our Vote, which has been wonderful. We just got done with our faith-wide conference a week or so ago, where we made 114,000 calls to voters in Texas. But we're also engaging in the difficult and essential conversations about anti-racism and anti-oppression. We're working with local and state partners to advance calls for decarceration through voter education around sheriff and district attorneys' races. And we are in solidarity with uprisings in the movement and are doing the work to divest from policing and other death-dealing systems that disproportionately affect Black and Brown communities. Because if collective liberation is the goal, then abolition has to be the word. And we are supporting folks in practical ways, whether that's making masks, distributing food as well, because we also know that keeping communities in crisis, which is what we have done for decades, is a strategy that disempowers and disenfranchises. So if we, as faith leaders, like faith leaders of the past, are going to keep our minds and our hearts, and yes, as well, our investments focused on collective liberation, then the political and moral work actually become one. And that is what we're seeing today, is that people are really, really inviting faith movements into the public square and yearning for an understanding of politics that centers the community over, over individualism, right? And over um, competition, because this pandemic, as terrible as it has really focused us on knowing that we, in fact, do need each other to survive, whether that is a reflection on how the virus is transmitted, or the delicate balance of maintaining an economy, right? Um, who has to work, and what gets produced for us to literally survive and thrive. And so that is what I'm really, really excited about. We will do it, of course, imperfectly, but I do believe that if we focus our goals on collective liberation, then as we bring that voice into the public square and do the work of our faith, that liberal leaders must come out, right, and reclaim that space and build a new political movement that imagines a world outside of what we've been told is possible, and actually embody and create that world together.